Hello, welcome to Tigress on Tuk-tuk, a nature show for the Indian urbanite. I'm Sarah Mohan, and this week, flying right at you on marvellous leathery wings are bats. That's right, the only freaking mammal in the world that can freaking fly. If you can't quite compute how crazy that is, let me tell you, it is crazy. Bats are like unicorn level phantasmal creatures with Greek god fitness levels, except they live in the real world. Do I hear a tisk tisk and you're thinking, of course you'd say that, Sarah. You say that about everything. But bats are dirty and vile. Bats carry diseases. Hello, bats and COVID. What planet have you lived on? Okay. I hear you. And I raise you one totally terrific, incredibly knowledgeable bat biologist who will walk you through the world of bats, tell you field stories, and gently enlighten you as to who the real problem is. Not pointing any fingers. There's a lot that we don't know about these mysterious creatures, and even more nonsensical crap that we make up about them. And with COVID, bats' bad rap has really spread far and wide. Our guest today was actually the only person I'd already been friends with before recording for the pod, and so I was so sure that this was going to be a breeze of an interview. Unfortunately, he lives time zones away in Berlin, and we had to do this online. Never my favorite way of doing it. On the day my internet was shite, it started tipping down in the middle of our chat, making it worse, and hence there are bits which sound like our autotune went rogue mid-sentence. I really wasn't my best interviewer self on the day because all this stuff got in my head, and the only reason we managed a decent conversation was because we're friends and this guy has the patience of father time. So, obviously, we couldn't do what we always do on the show, which is follow our guests around and record them in their element. I have all these fantasies of walking around with this biologist at night, armed with his bat detector and my field recorder. Someday. Anyway, we still did something extra special, and for the first time ever on this podcast, we spoke to someone who gave us his first-hand experiences of bats and working with bats out in the field. Now, this guy worked as a field assistant for our guest, so he's someone who'd had zero background or interest in bats prior to all this, and hence his take on bats is 100% objective and relatable for people like you and I. Plus, his perspective is super unique because he also is a member of the Gujjar community, so his views bring a lot of context vis-a-vis the landscape and area. So that's two guests, you guys, and a complexly fun episode to produce. Our bat biologist is currently working on his PhD at the Institute for Zoo and Wildlife Research in Berlin. He's smack bang in the middle of his data crunching, so send him good vibes, he needs it. He's studying the diversity of bats across elevational gradients in the Himalayas of Uttarakhand. He's been working on bats for the past 9 years and is also co-author of the book Naturalist's Guide to Mammals of India. He's big on bird watching and goes off on birding trips whenever he can sneak one in. He's a big movie buff and loves Wong Kar-wai films. He loves cricket, particularly when he's playing it with his brother. Like me, he's got a big sweet tooth. He's enlightened me on multiple German desserts. And he loves to cook. But it has to be some complicated dish with fancy schmancy sounding ingredients. A simple Jamie at home recipe won't do for this one. I know all this because I got it from the best source, his lovely wife. Here's the funny, easy to talk to, super approachable, all-round rock-solid nice guy, bat biologist and my dear friend, Rohit Chakravarti.
You can call me. No, you can't call me by my nickname. A Bengali boy never tells his nickname. It's embarrassing.
Of course, I've had a go at cracking this nickname puzzle. I haven't had much success, though.
As a child, I actually do not remember being drawn to nature. In fact, at different points of my childhood, I wanted to do completely different things. For example, in sixth grade, I got swayed by watching patriotic movies and I wanted to join the army.
Oh.
2 years later, I got swayed by watching a lot of horror TV shows, and I wanted to be a person who studies spirits and ghosts. And I mean, actually, you could say that that was the first time when I thought of research as a career, even if it's in a completely random pseudoscientific direction. But then a year after that, in my ninth grade, my mother took both my brother and I on a safari to Naxira Wildlife Sanctuary, incidentally on World Environment Day 2005. And that's when we saw a tigress bathing in a water hole, and both of us immediately fell in love with nature. So the tigress rescued me from, from being a deranged parapsychologist.
Tigresses simply are the best. So after this, he really got into bird watching. How did he meet bats? Unexpectedly, not in the nicest place, and yet made the romantic in me go warm and fuzzy.
Mm.
Most people find their calling in their dreams. I found my calling in a dustbin.
Huh?
I'm serious. In 2007, when I was 16 years old, my pet dog then found a bat in our kitchen dustbin.
Wow.
And
Okay.
that was the first time I saw this cute, gentle animal up close and personal.
Don't.
And that interest stayed with me until I became a bat scientist.
Oh my God, so cute.
Okay. So, Rohit, what even is a bat?
Okay, so a bat is a mammal with its hands modified into a pair of wings, and in fact, it reflects also in the way the bat is referred to in scientific literature. Is Chiroptera or Chiroptera, whichever way you pronounce it, which is a culmination of two Greek words where chiros means hands and ptera means wings. So it's literally a mammal with hand. It's a hand-winged mammal.
Right. Yeah. And their wings are, of course, very, very sort of different to birds, right? And that, of course, they don't have any feathers and they're very sort of leathery.
Exactly. If you look at a bat, it exactly looks like this. It looks like our pair of hands, but the fingers are elongated. I mean, imagine, you're walking with a proportional to your body. You're walking with a meter long. That's what it looks like.
Right.
They're not as light as birds. They I mean, being mammals, they all have marrow in their bones, so the bones are filled. Of course, when you're holding bats, they're the lightest. They're probably the lightest animals that I've had in my
Mm.
life. I've held
Mm.
bats that range from 3 grams to maybe 100, 120, 150 grams. So they're really light. I mean,
Mm.
it's smaller than your bottle of toothpaste, your tube of toothpaste. Having said that, they're not quite built for taking off effectively. Like birds
Mm.
have hollow bones where they can take off at any instance, but when you have a bat on the ground, it takes quite a while to actually get into flight. And that's one of the reasons why bats actually hang upside down, because
Oh.
all that you need to do to take off is drop yourself, open your wings like a parachute, get some buoyancy, and then you flap your way away.
Clearly, they are pros at the inverted muscle up. Told ya, Greek god fitness levels.
Bats doing all the flying around that they're doing. Do you think do they sweat a lot? Like I would after 5 push-ups.
No, actually they don't. I mean, it's not like their bodies are not tired. I mean, it's like, doing 10 rounds of aerobics in seconds.
You're on the bench, step up, step, tap.
So it's a lot of effort flying, but bats don't sweat. They do keep their mouths open, so maybe
Mm.
they are panting like dogs. Yeah,
Ah,
but
okay.
their baseline of getting tired is definitely 1,000 times higher than ours.
Evolutionarily, the earliest bat fossils popped up during a period called the Eocene, and by the sounds of it, this was a period of great change and reordering on the planet. Old mammal orders were replaced by new. For example, hoofed animals started appearing. Flowering plants were flourishing, and along with that came the insect explosion. Basically, once the dinos were knocked off center stage, other life forms jumped into the fray to try and establish their niches and take their place in the world. Now, bat fossils haven't been the easiest thing to come by. It's always been tantalizing bits and bobs like teeth, jaws, and skulls. In fact, the oldest known bat relics as far as the Indian subcontinent is concerned were discovered by scientists in 2005 in Gujarat. But so much about bats is shrouded in mystery. How in the heck did this mammal attain the power of flight? And I mean full-on proper up-down flap-flap avian-esque flight, not the paragliding type of things that some species of squirrels do. Now there's a clue.
So what the story that we know so far from the fossil record and molecular dating is that bats came into existence after the reptilian dinosaurs went extinct, and at this point of time there is assumed to be an animal which was like a shrew, the one that we see in our houses or in granaries eating insects. It's an insectivorous animal. And there are also arboreal shrews. There are shrews that live on.
Shrews that live on trees, is what he said. Thanks, Internet.
These shrews tried to catch insects that were flying around from the trees. And in the process, over millions and millions of years of evolution, these animals started developing wings and became the bats as we know them today. And another interesting thing about shrews, the present day shrews, is that they also use ultrasound to some extent. So it's a very logical guess. It's a very logical flow of thought that this animal could have given rise to an animal like a bat.
Wow. Okay, so that's how that happened. I was wondering where they came from. Like, did they trick a bird god, or did they give evolution a bribe, or what was? How did they do it?
Well, they certainly gave evolution a bribe.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Because it's hard to be such a perfect animal. It's hard to be such a super animal otherwise.
If you look at how much of variety there is, like either in terms of size or diet, so how many bats are we looking at globally and in India?
There's a huge variety. There's truly a mind-boggling variety, and we don't realize that because we sometimes I feel it's such disservice to call them just bats, because it's doesn't give the impact of how large the diversity is, because we're talking about 1,400 species in the world.
1,420 was the number when Rohit and I chatted. New species are being discovered all the time in bat world. Of that, we have about 130 species in India.
And in India, they're also the largest group of mammals. They make up around 30% of our mammal diversity. And yeah, it's a pity that we don't know much about them. So bats actually cover a whole gradient of sizes, from animals that fit on your palm to animals and cover your entire body with their wings. There's a huge variation of size.
Okay, so traditionally, bats have been classified into two groups, microbats and megabats. Recent genetic studies suggest that we've probably outgrown this rather simplistic classification. Microbats tend to be small, well, smaller, everything is relative. There are some large microbats too, like the false American vampire bat. Microbats have varied diets. They eat insects, some fish, some hunt birds and smaller bats, others live on fruit and nectar, and some feed on blood. Not human blood, but blood from birds and other mammals, unlike what Bram Stoker would have you believe. Then there are the megabats, aka fruit bats, or the flying foxes, old world bats that are found around the tropics.
And of course, we don't need to go too far to see them. You can just, in any in India, you at night or at dusk and look at the sky, you see these big bats flying. They are among the largest species in the world, called the Indian. There are a couple that are larger Indian flying fox.
Bats echolocate. Fact of life, right? Not quite. It's the microbats that echolocate. Well, mostly, we think.
Most of them do. Most of them create acoustic maps of their surroundings, but it's not always, an exclusively acoustic map. they also use their eyes to quite an extent. So blind as a bat is a myth,
Ah,
and
right.
bats are not particularly blind. They can see. They use their eyes to a good degree, but when it comes to
Hmm.
hunting insects, their eyes
Hmm.
are not as effective because you're looking for precise targets in the whole wide sky, and that's where echolocation becomes more effective.
Right.
Um, but when bats are migrating, they use their eyes to a good extent. When bats are choosing mates, that's another time where they use their eyes quite a bit.
I see you, baby.
And on the other side, we also have fruit-eating bats, which do not echolocate at all. And most of the fruit-eating bats, because now they're looking for larger targets, they're looking for fruits on a fruiting tree, or you don't need to navigate to the same extent. You
Right.
know where they are, you know from memory where they are, and you need to just track them with your smell and ultrasound. So fruit bats don't, a lot of fruit bats, I mean, some fruit bats produce ultrasound, but we don't know to what extent they use it for navigation. It's not a great deal of navigation, but
Mm.
that we're sure of.
So, and they communicate with each other, right? Is that echolocation as well, or how do they communicate with each other?
There are multiple ways. Some of that is echolocation. Well, actually, it can't be termed echolocation itself. There's a distinction between producing ultrasound and producing and echolocation.
Ah,
Echolocation is when you're using sound to navigate, and you could do that by producing ultrasound or by producing audible sounds. You have better chance of doing it by producing ultrasound, but that communication can happen with ultrasound and without ultrasound. In fact, many of the calls that they use to either to defend their territories or to attract mates happen just below the ultrasound, so people with good hearing can hear them. And also stuff like, distress, when a bat is being troubled by another bat or is being troubled by a bat researcher like me. Bats make sounds that we can hear, and I think that's a good strategy because it tells me when I'm really troubling a bat and when I'm
manhandling it,
not.
right?
Yeah.
So what is a bat usually up to? Like, what is the day plan slash night plan like?
If I were to group them, bats are solitary. They don't like a lot of nuisance hanging around them.
Hmm.
They like to have their private space. Then there are some that live in smaller groups, and typically these groups are harems with one male and several females. The females may be related to each other or they're not. The
Nice.
other ones are the complete party animals. They live in colonies, they live inside caves, and these caves can go from anywhere between 100 to around 10 million, which is the largest known colony. So
Hold on. Can you imagine being stuck in a cave with 10 million bat chandeliers overhead?
Is bat poop one of the worst things ever? Do you get rained on?
you do. Yeah, you do quite often. I mean, if you go to a cave with thousands and thousands of bats, yeah, you are taking a poop shower.
Uh, is it like bird poop?
No, no, it's not. It's much smellier. It is
Oh.
quite smelly. It's
Ye-
like it's like being stuffed 100 public toilets in India. Uh, but but yeah, it's not. But it's a different kind of urine smell. It's not exactly like it's not as bad as human urine smell. It's
uh,
bad, but you can feel the
oh.
difference.
Oh yeah, that's a relief.
Lovely graphic details over there. Needless to say, Rohit went through many bottles of shampoo when he was doing cave work, and now we also know why they call it batshit crazy. A friend of mine had specifically asked.
And depending on where they are, they have different timetables, and have different schedules. The solitary ones sleep peacefully, and I would prefer being that kind of a bat. The ones in families have a lot more things to do. They either mate with each other during the day, or they sleep peacefully, or the males keep troubling the females, which is norm in most patriarchal societies.
Right.
And
Oh.
but the ones which are which are colonial are I really pity those animals, because I don't know when they get their sleep. Whenever you enter a cave, or whenever you see videos from infrared cameras put inside caves, I mean, they're always haggling each other, and it's not just one species but several species roosting together. There's very little peace during the time when they're supposed to sleep. um, and then once they're out in the night, yeah, they're mostly out there to catch insects, fruits. So they spend a lot of time eating, they spend a lot of time drinking water. They also have to attract mates outside the cave. So that doesn't happen inside the cave, then they go out, and sometimes bats actually sing in the ultrasonic range. So
Oh,
they sing in the ultrasonic range to attract females. Yeah.
oh,
And then
wow.
all of this changes when the season change. When it's the cold season, the insect activity is low. Bats either hibernate, or they go through small periods of inactivity. So they become inactive for 3 or 4 nights. And then once again, when the weather is slightly warmer, they come out and feed on insects.
Okay, I'm sure your natural thought progression, like mine, is obviously how in the heck do they get it on? If you Google how do bats have sex, a delightful array of articles pop up, all with enough material to inspire you in case you're writing some kinked out fantasy erotica or you simply want to spice up your bedroom vibes. So, different bats do it differently. Some while hanging upside down, some take it down to ground level, and some engage in acrobatic aerial coitus. Then there are some species that take the art of seduction to a whole other level. Some do their seducing with a furry skin flap on. So, literally, they pull a mask over their face and only reveal themselves at the last minute after all the wooing is done. Some bats, like the Indian flying fox, very often engage in oral sex. This is rather rare in the animal kingdom and a fairly recent discovery. Now, we know all this because researchers have stuck cameras in bat caves and totally creeped out on them.
The males and the females mate before going into hibernation, which to any normal person would seem like a terrible decision, because I mean, you're mating at the lean part of the year, and
Yeah.
and you're mating without any birth control in the lean part of the year, which means that the females deal with will have to deal with pregnancy while they're hibernating.
Oh,
But
boy.
then evolution is one of the best solutions to, and so that's why females actually, after mating, they don't really get pregnant. They hold the sperms of the male, they
Oh.
save it for later, and once they are done with their hibernation, which is 3 or 4 months of sleeping, they slowly let the sperm impregnate themselves, and
Oh.
that's the time when the females, just before spring is the time when the females start becoming pregnant, and by the time they're completely out of hibernation and the insect diversity is high again, that's the time where the females are truly pregnant. So that's the smart move that
Yeah.
the bat females put up. Parts of the world, like most parts of India, they don't have to worry about these things. So they mate in winter, late winter, and
Mm.
by the time it's monsoon, the females are pregnant or they have their young ones.
Ah.
So they time it. I mean, like all animals in the world,
Mm.
bats start time their reproduction in such a way that when the pups are born, they have enough food to eat.
Okay, now that we're nice and sated with some basic bat info, it's time to bring on our other guest who gets into what it's like to be out and about at night looking for bats. He is big on playing Ludo and gets very competitive, I'm told. This guy had Rohit's back for 3 out of the 4 summers that he worked in the hills of Uttarakhand, setting up mist nets and brandishing bat detectors all through the night. So he's practically like family to Rohit. Here's Rohit's right-hand man and field assistant, Zareef Khan Lodha.
Hello, Zareef.
Hi.
Hi.
Like I said, he's a member of the Van Gujjar tribe. Traditionally, they are nomadic mountain pastoralists from the Uttarakhand Himalayas, entirely dependent on their cattle, living off milk and various milk products.
अपने भैंस चुगाना, उनका दूध निकालना और कोई एक लेके रोजाना दूध लेके चला जाता था। एक ही आदमी जाएगा, वही सामान लाएगा, खर्चा ज़्यादा नहीं था। ज़्यादातर खाना भैंस भैंस और दूध बहुत होता था। लस्सी जो अपना हमारा लस्सी होता है घर का, वो बहुत होता था। तो वो सब चीज़ें दूध से और घी से वहीं पे खा लेते थे।
So, keeping their cattle well fed and healthy is crucial, and the Van Gujars undertake a seasonal migration to ensure this. During summer, when their buffaloes get too hot and bothered in the foothills and grasses dry up, they move from the lower Terai Sivalik region to the high alpine meadows, or the Bugyals if you've heard of those. And of course, in winter, when it gets too cold up there, they move back down, where now the grazing pastures have sprung back to life. Now, their whole relationship with the forests and mountains have been fraught with all kinds of bans, and there have been violations of the tribe's grazing rights, especially on protected forest land, which has caused a lot of hardship and loss. Many say that the threat to forest land and wildlife is not the Van Gujars or their grazing cattle, but unplanned urbanization and uncontrolled tourism. Surprise, surprise. But all members of this tribe no longer live this way. Already, many of them have been relocated out of protected forests and have traded their nomadic lifestyle for a sedentary existence. Zareef, in fact, is a second-generation village resident, and he talked about his family's traditional lifestyle rather wistfully. He sounds almost nostalgic about simpler times.
जंगल में ये अलग था कि शहर की चीज़ों से जुड़ाव नहीं था और सिर्फ जंगल में ही था। अभी गांव में आ चुके हैं, वहाँ से इधर बसे हैं और यहाँ पे 10 चीज़ें हो चुकी है। ये काम भी करना है, खेती भी देखना है, उधर भी जाना है, इधर भी जाना है। उस समय को और इस समय को अगर हम कंपेयर करें तो वो वाला समय आसान था, ऐसा बोलते हैं।
But he also appreciates the facilities that him and his family now have.
बट इस समय में सुविधा भी है। उस समय में बहुत सुविधा कोई नहीं थी। यहाँ के लिए अभी आसान हुई है और अच्छी हुई है। अपने बच्चों को पढ़ा लिखा भी सकते हैं। पास में स्कूलें हैं।
Access to education has really helped children in the community, creating awareness and general upliftment.
पहले तो बिल्कुल ज़ीरो थी शिक्षा।
In their migratory way of life, everything they needed they got from the forest, from firewood to fodder for their cattle. Now, of course, that dependence has reduced a great deal.
तो पहले ऐसा था कि हम ज़्यादातर प्रकृति पर ही निर्भर थे। तो खाना बनाने के लिए हम लकड़ियों का ही उपयोग करते थे और अपने भैंस के लिए जंगल की चीज़ें ही जंगल से लाके गोंद जैसी चीज़ें और उसको नमक में लाके उसका एक डला बनाते थे हम बड़ा सा। तो उसमें भी सारी चीज़ें हम प्रकृति से ही मिलाते थे। जो हमारी कम्युनिटी के जो लोग अभी भी जंगल में हैं, वो अभी भी प्रकृति पे ज़्यादातर निर्भर है। हम लोग भी अभी निर्भर है, बट उससे कम हो गए हैं। अपने गाय भैंस के लिए अपने खेत से अनाज निकाल लेते हैं।
But basically, what he means is that the cattle were going out to graze in the jungle when they were in the forest, but now whatever byproduce that they have from their fields is mixed and fed to the cattle. So they don't have to graze them anymore, but they stall feed them using all the byproduce of the farms.
तो मैं ये जानना चाहती हूँ कि आप रोहित से कैसे मिले?
रोहित से मिलने से पहले मैं एक और संस्था में काम करता था। देहरादून की एक संस्था थी NSI, और रोहित का कांटेक्ट वहाँ उन लोगों से हुआ और उन लोगों
Zareef was part of the Nature Science Initiative when he met Rohit and came on board as his field
गांव
assistant.
के बाजू में ही एक जंगल है, उसमें हम लोग बर्डिंग करने गए थे।
अच्छा।
और अपने जंगल में थोड़ा घुमाया हमने और उसके बाद फिर रोहित सर ने अपने काम के बारे में बताया कि मैं ऐसे इस चीज़ पे काम कर रहा हूँ।
In the beginning, when he first heard that this strange scientist from the city was researching bats in the dead of the night in a dense jungle, he did have some apprehensions. Not just about bats with their terrible reputations, but the other beasts that roam the forests too.
जब शुरू में मैं रोहित के साथ गया था, एक तो ये था कि चमगादड़ पता नहीं क्या करेंगे। वो था, रोहित सर ने बताया था कि ऐसा नहीं होता है, वो सब था थोड़ा, वो डर था बट कम था। और दूसरी चीज ये थी कि अगर हम रात को जंगल में काम करेंगे और रात को ही कर रहे हैं, थोड़ा थोड़ा चमगादड़ का भी डर था, और ऊपर
हाँ,
से भूत जानवर अटैक, जो शेर
हाँ।
हाथी वो सब थे, उनसे भी थोड़ा डर था।
He got over his fear of large carnivores lurking about. In fact, Rohit even told me a story of Zareef once spotting a leopard barely 10 meters away. No one else had seen it, and a nice little staring contest ensued between man and cat. Once the big cat had slinked off, Zareef very nonchalantly informed Rohit about it.
और जरीफ ने जब जानवर को देखा तो उसे देखकर ऐसा भी नहीं लग रहा था कि उसने कोई लेपर्ड उसके सामने से गया है। वो आराम से अपने मजे में था और फिर वो मेरे को तो धीरे से पीछे आके मुझे बोलता है कि सर वहां पे लेपर्ड है। मैं बोला क्या?
But the memory that Rohit remembers vividly is meeting the local forest banshee in the dead of the night. And she usually had a nice little greeting for you.
It's a long wailing call. And then Jarif and another assistant with me, Shamshad, who's a cousin of Jarif, they were both like, नहीं नहीं सर, ये चुड़ैल है, ये हमारे गांव के आसपास भी मिलती है, ये चुड़ैल है, this is a devil that we know very well. All our old family members have warned us to stay away from her, and she particularly seeks unmarried men. And then, yeah. And the moment I heard it for the first time, I thought, maybe flying squirrel. After subsequent sightings, we saw the squirrel, almost. There was a time when we saw them every 2 days, and then we heard the calls coming from the right direction. So now we've overcome that fear.
Now, Jarif knew of bats from his childhood, but mostly in the form of all the nonsense myths that you and I also tend to believe in.
घर वाले भी और दूसरे लोग भी, ये चमगादड़ रात को उड़ते हैं और ये खून चूस लेते हैं, ये चिपकते हैं, ये छोड़ते नहीं है, ये आदमी को मारते हैं, खून पी के मारते हैं, ऐसी ऐसी चीजें हमें बोलते थे लोग।
Bats drink your blood, bats fly
और
into your hair, they
वो
stick to
ऐसे
you,
हमारे
bats go for
दिमाग
your
में
eyes.
हाँ होता होगा कि
So
वो
many
बाद
unscientific,
में तो
untrue,
हमारे
superstitious
ऊपर
things
ऐसे
out there. Fortunately for Jarif, his nighttime field adventures with Rohit really gave him a fresh understanding of this enigmatic mammal. So, what's a batty night out with Rohit and Jarif like?
तो सबसे पहले हम सोचते थे कि पानी, जहाँ पे पानी अगर हमें मिल जाए तो हम पानी पे नेट लगाएंगे, क्योंकि चमगादड़ सुबह लाइट खुलने से पहले अपने घर में चला जाता है और जब शाम तक वो बैठा रहता है, और शाम को जब वो निकलता है तो सबसे पहले उसको पानी ही चाहिए होता है
बिल्कुल।
ज़्यादातर।
They begin the
तो
evening by setting
जल्दी
up
से पहले
mist
वो
nets.
पानी की ही तरफ
These
आएगा
are
भागते
near
हुए, हम
invisible,
पहले सबसे ज़्यादा सोचते
superfine,
थे कि
and
पानी
light
की
nets
नेट
that
लगेगा, ताकि तब
licensed
ज़्यादा
bird and
पानी
bat
मिल जाता था।
scientists use to catch their subjective study
और
and
दूसरा
release
चीज़,
them back
अगर हम
again
लोग
once they
पानी के
did what they
आसपास
had to
नहीं
do.
हैं,
It's
आसपास
crucial
पानी
that you
नहीं है,
pick
वहाँ
the
पे
right
नेट नहीं
spot,
लगा सकते,
and
तो हम फिर
usually these
सोचते थे
guys set things
कि
up close to a water body
घना
because a
जंगल
bat
हो
just awakened
जहाँ
from
पे,
its
और वहाँ
slumber
पे
is
एक
usually
रास्ता
parched.
और खुली सी जगह, उस डीप जंगल के बीच में खुली सी जगह और एक रास्ते जैसी जगह पे नेट लगाएं, जिससे
If
बैट
there's no
आजू
accessible
बाजू
water
पेड़ों
body
के या
around,
किसी
then they
ढलान
choose a
से निकल
clearing
के आए और
inside
एकदम
the
से
dense forest
ऐसी
because
खुली
this
सी
is
जगह
usually
पे
where a bat forages for
खाने
insects.
में आसानी हो जाती थी, क्योंकि खुली जगह पे इंसेक्ट भी ज़्यादा उड़ते हैं।
Once caught, keeping up strict health and safety rules like wearing gloves at all times, because some bats can really chomp down in self defense.
चमगादड़ को पकड़ने के बाद चमगादड़ को नापते थे, उसका ब्लड लेते थे, और विंग, क्या बोलते थे सर उसको, विंग टिश्यू,
Wing tissue.
Rohit and
विंग
Jarif would
टिश्यू
go
लेते थे,
about with
और फिर
measuring,
उसके बाद
identifying, getting
वेट
blood
लेते
and
थे
tissue
उसका,
samples, recording
और
the bat's
देखते थे
call,
उसको अच्छे से। तरह तरह के चमगादड़ आते थे, तो जब पहली पहली बार तो बहुत अच्छे लगते थे वो छोटे छोटे क्यूट।
and just enjoying a cozy couple of minutes with their cute temporary prisoner. Sometimes things could get very intimate.
Bats, when they are flying around, they're rather warm. When they're flying around with all that exercise, their internal body temperature is quite high. But when you catch a bat that was flying, like we do in order to sample them, they become cold instantly. And that, yeah, I really don't know how that happens, but they become very cold. They become inactive. Sometimes you really uh, feel that a bat is not a warm-blooded animal. It's more a cold-blooded animal. It's like, when if you put a lizard out of the sun, it becomes inactive, and that's
Oh.
really what happens to a bat. They drop the metabolism to a very, very low state when they are caught, and sometimes in order to make them fly after taking their photos, after taking data from them, we have to warm them. And my best strategy for warming them is I put them in a cloth bag. I put them close to my chest, let my
Oh,
chest heat them up, and then,
right.
yeah. So I literally have a very intimate relationship with bats.
Oh, you've gotten a lot of bat hugs then. Oh, are they squirmy? Do they stay still?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. No, actually, it's very funny when you keep them close to your chest. Suddenly, I mean, for a long time, they are absolutely dead. They don't move around, and then suddenly you feel something like an insect walking on your chest, and the bat has got up from its sleep.
Oh, wow. Oh. I guess you're talking about the smaller insect bats, right?
Yeah,
Not
I'm talking about the smaller ones. Oh, yeah. The bigger ones, I wouldn't dare doing this to.
Right.
No, but the bigger ones, also there are some intimate moments that you can have with them.
Okay.
Despite all the torture that you put them through, you're catching them, you're checking their wing, you're checking their butt, you're doing everything,
Hmm.
and but despite that, the bat doesn't quite hold a grudge against you when you offer it fruits. I'm talking about the fruit bats now. When you offer them a fruit meal, they just gobble it up, and they become this suddenly active once again. And
Oh,
yeah, it's like, yeah, I mean, after all that torture, we're suddenly friends.
so easy. Poor things. Okay, so yeah, that brings me to the next question. All of this intimacy with bats, I'm sure there are lots of people who are cringing right now at the thought of bats stuffed in their coats or jackets. But
Yeah.
so aren't they
Mhm.
then crawling with all sorts of diseases? That's what people would ask, or viruses or pathogens.
Yeah. Yeah, people have a valid reason to be scared of bats. I wouldn't say it's all unfounded or stuff like that.
Hmm.
Bats do carry a lot of viruses. The things that I do it, of course, with a lot of precaution. I don't really keep an animal in close contact with my body. There's always
Yeah.
layers of clothing and layers of physical protection between me and the animal.
Hmm.
But having said that, what is indeed dumbfounded is to think that by being scared of bats or by killing bats, we're going to solve a problem. To find logic in what I'm saying, you don't need to look beyond your own lifespan. I mean, you have been sharing space with bats for many years. I can guarantee that every household in India has a bat somewhere. The bat also knows how to maintain social distancing way
Mm-hmm.
better than we can ever learn. The bats
Hmm.
have been living with us and they've been keeping their own space in our own houses. We rarely come in contact with bats despite them living so close to us. And the other point is that not all bats have the viruses that we are talking about. The COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2 virus is supposed to have, I mean, science tells us that it has originated from bats, but it's not like every bat in the world is carrying that virus. The bat from which this virus has probably evolved is a horseshoe bat, is a species of horseshoe bat, which is a forest dwelling bat. So that perhaps tells us that, it's not so much about the bats that live in our cities surrounding us. When we mess with our forests and we mess with the animals that live in the forest, we create these diseases that can hamper our own economy and existence.
Right, so in any habitat, urban or wild, a bat flying around, going about its business, is not raining down pathogens and parasites on you, even in very close proximity. It just doesn't happen that way. Take it from a guy who has spent over a quarter of his life handling bats, hundreds and hundreds of bats. Oh, and his field assistant too.
कोरोना आया तो बोलने लगे, अरे तुमसे दूर रहना चाहिए यार, ये तो चीन में जब ये शुरू में बीमारी फैली तो ये तो बता कि चमगादड़ से फैली है,
हाँ
और तुमने तो चमगादड़ का काम किया है, तुमसे दूर रहना चाहिए,
Oh, wow.
शायद तुम्हारे अंदर भी वो बीमारी हो।
Oof.
तो फिर हमने बोला कि नहीं नहीं भाई, ये चमगादड़ से नहीं फैली है, अगर चमगादड़ से फैली तब की फैली होती तो हमने कितना काम किया चमगादड़ से, तब तक तो हम मर जाते। तो फिर उसके बाद लोगों ने मानना चालू कर दिया कि हाँ सही है यार, इन्होंने तो किया है, अगर होता ऐसा होता तो फिर अब तक तो ये जिंदा नहीं होते।
If handling bats could give me COVID, I'd be long dead. That's what Zareef tells people who have misguided notions about bats spreading the disease. The bigger issue is to think about preserving, maybe even creating habitats and spaces, especially in an urban setting, where creatures like bats can live as they always have, keeping them at a safe distance from us and thereby keeping ourselves safe as well.
I think in modern societies, the things that put bats at risk are the way we are the way we are shaping the landscape right from cities to forests. And in cities where bats had been living with us for so many years, they can suddenly not find adequate roost places. This is because the way we are building our houses these days, if we're shifting to glass or to other kinds of material, we don't give bats enough places to roost. And we are also in the cities, we are getting rid of green spaces quite often. Our water bodies are getting polluted, and those can have massive impacts on bats because they need the green places to roost, and they need the drinking water is the first thing that they do when they emerge from their roost. Yeah, that's about the cities. In the forests, of course, everything about maintaining connectivity across forests, not making forests fragmented. All of these make a huge difference to bat populations. And unfortunately, we don't even know how badly they affect bats in India because nobody's gone out and studied bats to that detail.
Hmm. Yeah. And what are the roles that bats do play in our lives? We were just talking about how the things that we do that are sort of driving them away, but why do we need them around? And why do people need to know that?
I think contrary to what people think, I mean, when we think of bats as a health hazard, on the other hand, I think bats are a real boon for our health because they are animals that are flying out at night hunting insects, which means they are hunting pest insects that destroy our crops. They hunt mosquito quite a degree. So and these are also proven by studies. Bats provide massive ecosystem services. The pest insects that they consume occur in crops like rice, corn, cotton. These are a combination of cash crops and crops that we depend on for our subsistence. So it's like,
Hmm.
bats provide us with some kind of food security. Then there are fruit-eating bats which pollinate plants. They also disperse the seeds of various fruits.
Hmm.
So they act like gardeners. And some important plants that they pollinate. Well, one for the adults who are listening to this, bats pollinate the flower of agave, which produce kila. And I think if that's a massive reason for half of the global urban population to fall in love with bats.
Right.
But for people who live along the coastline, like you in Chennai, and people from Bombay, you owe a lot to bats because bats pollinate the flowers of mangroves. And without
Yeah.
mangroves, both Chennai and Bombay, we don't know what scale of
Hmm.
destruction we are looking at if the next cyclone comes in.
Bats face some serious threats in the form of deforestation and habitat loss. But guess what's the biggest screw rover of all time?
The biggest of the biggest threats that bats face in the world is their bad reputation. And I
Hmm.
think nothing is bigger than that. I mean, just the kind of attitude that we hold towards bat, just the way we think that we can't coexist with bats is a huge threat. I mean, you can't put a number to it. That makes it even bigger.
Globally, another big threat to bats is the white nose syndrome, a fungal disease that fatally affects hibernating bats and has decimated populations across the United States. Now, this is completely an anthropogenic goof up of gargantuan proportions.
The same fungus also occurs in Europe, but it does not kill bats over here. So the logical, the reason behind that is that somebody, it could have been a bat researcher, it could have been a tourist or whoever it is, somebody transported this fungus from Europe to North America, where hibernating bats never encountered it before, and that's why the fungus, it killed hibernating bats at a time when their immune response is anyway very low. So this is also a global impact of human beings transporting themselves from one place to another, and with them carrying a lot of other things. I mean, we talk about bats being a human health hazard, but the opposite is more true than that.
Truth hurts like a bitch, eh? Well, spreading the right message about bats is something we all need to get with, and we can make little ripples of impact within our own communities. Zareef is living testament to that.
सबसे पहले तो मैं लोगों से यही कहूँगा कि मैं 1000 से 1200 बैट अपने हाथ में पकड़ चुका हूँ और जो ये अफवाह और झूठी चीज़ें हैं इन पे बिल्कुल भी विश्वास ना करें क्योंकि बैट से ऐसा कुछ नहीं होता है, ना ही वो खून चूसता है, ना ही वो आदमी के शरीर से चिपकता है और ना ही वो काटता है, कुछ नहीं करता है और ये सब झूठी चीज़ें हैं, इन पे विश्वास ना करें। लोगों से भी यही कहना है कि आप लोग भी ना डरें, बट ना डरने का ये मतलब नहीं है कि आप जानवर को छेड़ो या उसको पकड़ो जाके कि ये कुछ नहीं करता तो इसको पकड़ ले, उसको छेड़ना तो नहीं चाहिए, बट अगर गलती से आपके घर में घुस जाए या आपके आसपास आ जाए तो उससे बिल्कुल भी ना डरें, उसको आराम से अपने रास्ते चला जाएगा वो।
In case you're wondering, Zareef hasn't worked with bats like he used to since Rohit wrapped up fieldwork. But him and a bunch of others have set up an organization with a beautiful name, and they are doing incredible work within the community. I have to give you a little sidebar about Mai.
हमारी गुज्जर कम्युनिटी के लोगों के पास भैंसें होती थी, काऊ एंड बफेलोस बहुत सारे।
Yes.
तो जो उनकी देखभाल करता था उनको उनकी देखभाल करता था और उसको गाय को क्या बीमारी है, भैंस को क्या बीमारी है, वो सब चीज जो आदमी देखता था उसको माई बोलते थे। उन गाय भैंस को लेके जंगल में ले जाना, चुगा के लाना, उसको बीमारी क्या है उसका पता लगाना, उसका दूध निकालना, उसका दूध अचानक से कम क्यों हो गया, इन सारी चीजों की जानकारी रखने वाले को माई बुलाते थे।
अच्छा।
A few of them, all of them who worked with me and worked in other wildlife projects earlier, they got together, Jarif, Bashir, Shamshad, Tawheed, they're the people who got together and founded this organization called MAI. The name represents, so in their community, which was traditionally a pastoral community, livestock had a huge importance. And the person who sort of acted like the veterinarian, the midwife, the everything, the caretaker of buffaloes was traditionally called Mai. So the name is very symbolic because it represents that these are the people, this organization is in existence to take care of the entire community in whatever they might face.
हम लोगों ने मिलके एक चीज सोची कि हमारी कम्युनिटी शिक्षा के प्रति बहुत कम जागरूक है। एक तो जहाँ पे स्कूल नहीं है, स्कूल का डिस्टेंस ज़्यादा है और गुज्जरों का एक गांव है, बच्चे ज़्यादा है, वहाँ पे पढ़ाई का कोई सिस्टम नहीं है। वहाँ जाके एक तो हम लोग वहाँ पे पढ़ाते हैं। हम लोगों ने अभी तक 6 गांव में चलाया है शिक्षा से अलावा, और ये चीजें होती है जो हमारा यूथ है।
They do activities ranging from education because, like Jarif said, there's a huge problem with lack of education and employment in their community. So they're trying to educate people in their community. And right now they have 6 villages under them, 25 students in each classroom, and they're doing basic education courses for them, for school kids. At the same time, they're working on livelihood opportunities for their youth, for the youth in their community.
ये किया है, इसके बाद ये करना पड़ेगा, यहाँ पे ये करोगे, इससे टीचर बनने के लिए ये करना पड़ेगा। तो हमारी जो कम्युनिटी है उनमें से वो पुरानी चीजें, पुरानी बोलचाल, पुरानी जो हमारा पहनावा था, वो धीरे-धीरे खत्म होता जा रहा है, क्योंकि कोई इस्तेमाल नहीं कर रहा है, कोई यूज नहीं कर रहा है, तो वो धीरे-धीरे चीजें खत्म होती जा रही है। जैसे
The other important
हमारे
thing that Jarif mentioned
जो शादियां
was
होती
that
है
their
उनमें
traditional
चावल
cultures
सभी
are
सभी घरों में
dying.
चावल होता है।
The words
जब
that they
वो
used,
चावल
or the
वाले
kind
दिन
of
आते हैं या
folk
चावल का
stories
नाम
that they had,
अभी तो सब कुछ
very
है,
few Gujjar
चावल
communities
तो
actually
होता होगा,
make migrations these days to with their
तो
livestock
अभी
from lower elevations to higher
अभी
elevations.
आज
And
के युवा को
so
अगर
some of
ऐसा
the members of their
बोलना ना
community
तो ये
of
tuk-tuk बोल
mine
दो,
have
तो उनको
been
बिल्कुल ठीक
following
लगेगा।
these communities and documenting
तो
uh,
वो
their folk
पुरानी चीजें
stories,
document करते हैं,
and all of this
जैसे
was
ये
earlier
हमारे
undocumented. So it's
और जो
for the
हमारे
first time they are the ones who are trying to document this,
दादा
document the
दादी
language, the culture, and
तो
everything.
ये बोलते
And for
थे
this,
कि
they
जो
have
हमारा पहनावा है
they
वो
receive
खत्म
funding
नहीं
from the
होना
Tata
चाहिए,
Steel
हम भी
Foundation,
थोड़ा थोड़ा काम
which
कर
is
रहे हैं।
extremely commendable.
This, I think, is incredible in a world where old ways and oral traditions are fast fading into obscurity. Rohit told me that Gojri, which they speak, is an oral language with no written script, but very similar to Punjabi. So while documenting things, they modify it to fit the Devanagari script.
बहुत बढ़िया जरीफ.
बहुत बढ़िया, yes, indeed. अच्छा Jarif, thank you so much.
ओके
ख्याल रखना अपना.
ओके ओके, थैंक यू, बाय।
Okay, urbanites, bats have all kinds of shitty odds stacked up against them. I mean, in India, the flying foxes, despite being an amazing pollinator of fruiting trees, are still categorized as vermin. There are things that you can do for bats around your urban home. Have some kind of a garden and make it wildlife friendly. Go back and listen to episode 2 for loads of pointers on that front. Leave roosting bats be. Behind pipelines, under dark staircases, just leave them be. If you can't do any of that, just use your words and do some good bat PR. And send people a link to this episode so they hear it from a scientist.
And that's what we all have to do. We have to talk to as many people as possible, people who know bats, people who've seen bats properly, scientists like me. We have a huge moral responsibility in telling the rest of the world how harmless bats are and how important they are to the society, and just simply how marvelous they are as animals. These are animals that really have bribed evolution in order to be way more perfect than any other animal. And I think people need to see that for themselves.
Yeah.
I'm lucky to live in an old ancestral home with a fairly big garden. I have at least 3 spots that bats hang out from about 6 in the evening. Now, with mango season coming up, I look forward to the flying foxes that go batshit crazy over the fruits. Look out for these little flying miracles. Under streetlights, around fruit trees. Flying foxes especially are typical of the evening sky. All right, so you can follow Rohit's work and adventures on Instagram at Painted Bat. That is in fact a type of bat, a beautiful one at that. Big thanks to him for lending me a couple of the sounds we used on this episode. Follow the show on Instagram at Tigress on Tuk-tuk. Don't forget to leave ratings and reviews, please. Tune in next time for the penultimate episode of this season. Can you believe it? Okay, I'll catch you real soon. Bye-bye.